We begin tonight with the latest on the violent assault of Paul Pelosi, the husband of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. In just the last hour, San Francisco District Attorney Brooke Jenkins announced charges against David DePape, the man who allegedly attacked Mr. Pelosi with a hammer in the couple's San Francisco home. They include attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and threats against a public official. And this comes after the Justice Department announced federal charges earlier today, including attempted kidnapping and assault with attempt to retaliate against a federal official by threatening or injuring a family member. The federal complaint shared more details on the attack, saying DePape was arrested inside the Pelosi residence. Mr. Pelosi later described to police that he had been asleep when DePape, whom he had never seen before, entered his bedroom looking for Nancy Pelosi. After police officers arrived and restrained DePape, they secured a roll of tape, white rope, a second hammer, a pair of rubber and cloth gloves, and zip ties from the crime scene. During a police interview, DePape said he was going to hold hostage Nancy Pelosi and talk to her. He also told investigators if Nancy were to tell DePape the truth, he would let her go. And if she lied, he was going to break her kneecaps. The details only confirm the nature of this attack, an attempted assault against one of the highest-ranking women ever to serve in U.S. government. And instead of condemning the violence, some Republicans and their far-right allies are spreading conspiracies about the attack to score cheap political points with their most easily duped and malevolent supporters. Donald Trump Jr., who continues to try to remain relevant, to be frank, retweeted a proposed Paul Pelosi Halloween costume featuring men's underwear and a hammer, while Louisiana Republican Clay Higgins tweeted, then deleted, a false anti-LGBT conspiracy theory surrounding the attack. The tweeting and then deleting didn't end there. Elon Musk, the new Twitter CEO, posted baseless allegations about the attack, proving what a hellscape of hate and misinformation Musk Twitter has already become on his watch. There's a long history of gaslighting and toxic politics regarding Speaker Pelosi. Republicans see her as public enemy number one. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy once said it will be hard not to hit Pelosi with the Speaker's gavel. Well, in 2019, Marjorie Taylor, soon to be ex-Mrs. Green, liked a Facebook comment that said, quote, "A bullet to the head would be quicker to remove Pelosi." There was also an anti-Pelosi ad by Lauren Boebert that ended with a menacing sound effect.
Madam Speaker, tear down this wall.
And even as recently as last week, days before the attack, Republican Congressman Tom Emmer posted a far too literal interpretation of the Fire Pelosi campaign. So no, it's not random. It's not about blue state crime, nor is it an isolated act. It is the event that, along with January 6th, solidifies and cements a new era of political violence, an era normalized, justified, and created by rhetoric so violent and so hateful that brutality is the natural endpoint. After all, isn't that the point of fascism? To create a dictatorship of violence and fear? I'm joined now by Clint Watts, former consultant with the FBI Counterterrorism Division and distinguished research fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute, along with Charlie Sykes, editor-at-large of The Bulwark. Thank you both for being here. I want to play one more soundbite of Brooke Jenkins, the district attorney in San Francisco, and here she is talking about the political violence that we're facing now.
We know that there have been tragedies in this very city of political leaders in the past. And so it's something that we have to take very seriously. And it's very sad to see that we are once again at a point in history where people believe that it's okay to express their political sentiments through violence. And so I think it really demonstrates that we have to calm things down. We have to decide that we are going to be more respectful as an American society, that it's okay to disagree. But it certainly is something that has unnerved us all.
You know, one wishes that people would feel that way, Clint, but that is not what we're seeing. What we're seeing on the right is they'll say, well, violence is not appropriate. but none of them are willing to do anything to tamp down what's clearly a tendency toward increasingly violent political rhetoric. I've never seen, I've been watching politics a long time. There are more ads now with Republicans shooting guns, shooting weapons, trying to show themselves looking like warlords than I've ever seen in politics. That's now normal in Republican politics. Is there any way that that kind of activity does not contribute to the kind of violence that we just saw happen to the speaker's husband?
Joy, it doesn't until political leaders really take responsibility for what they say and for the outcomes that come from it. And I just always think back to John McCain when he was on the campaign trail against Barack Obama, standing up when there was a lie said right in front of him. And whether that was good for him politically or not, he corrected it and he tried to settle down the situation. You know, he tried to take it down a notch. The opposite happens every single day in America today. You see increasing heightening of this. And the other part is just desensitization. When I saw the alert on my phone that this tragedy had happened, I was not surprised. I'm shocked, but I am not surprised because Nancy Pelosi has been demonized and is probably the #1 negative sentiment in terms of social media. We'd say negative sentiment of any political leader in the United States over the last 5 to 10 years. It is not surprising that she would be targeted or demonized. The rhetoric has gone from not just maligning her for her political views, but openly calling for attacks. January 6th, almost all of the audio is talking about finding Nancy Pelosi and trying to kill her or capture her. And then add to that, this
showed him shooting an automatic weapon. What's the point of that? And then it says fire.
Because, January 6th, I think, unleashed something. I mean, it was not a one-time event. It's a turning point where, in fact, you saw the celebration of violence. And even though I think it could have been an occasion for sobriety, for people to say, OK, now we need to tone down the rhetoric. Look what can happen where we are going. Exactly the opposite has happened. The rhetoric has been ramped up. There has been an attempt to portray some of that violence as acts of patriotism. So here you have Mr. DePape, who, when he's arrested by the police, explains that one of the reasons why he didn't flee after the 911 call was because he thought of himself as in the same position as American revolutionaries fighting against British tyranny. He has internalized this idea that his violence is justified politically because he is a revolutionary. Look, this didn't just come out of a vacuum. This has been cultivated. I will also say that this weekend felt like a turning point itself. As bad as everything has been going, I do not recall in the wake of the shooting of Steve Scalise the kind of humor, the kind of rationalization and celebration of violence that you are now seeing on the right. The number of prominent right-wing figures, including elected officials, who are pushing baseless conspiracy theories without any evidence whatsoever. And actually seeming to celebrate this attack. So when you have a culture that does not stand up against the threats of violence and then finds a way to rationalize it, enable it, and maybe wink at it that maybe you're doing the right thing, should we be surprised if some unbalanced individuals react to all of that? So things have been getting more and more dangerous. I do think that January 6th was a turning point, but I also think we'll look back on this weekend and the reaction to it as a turning point. And by the way, that includes the fact that the new owner of Twitter, Elon Musk, did turn Twitter into a full-blown hellscape when he himself began pushing some of these conspiracy theories to millions of his customers.